Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Tuesday, January 21st, 2025. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today: Ukrainian victory was never Biden's goal. So Time magazine published a report on Sunday that said, even though President Biden spent hundreds of billions of dollars on the Ukraine war, a Ukrainian victory was never actually his goal. So throughout the nearly 3-year proxy war, the Biden administration never set any clear goals and only repeated these mantras that we would hear. And one of them was the promise to support Ukraine for as long as it takes. But they never said as long as it takes for what to happen. And Eric Green, who was on Biden's National Security Council at the time of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, he told Time magazine that the administration never gave any promises to help Ukraine take back the land that Russian forces had captured. Green said, quote, "We were deliberately not talking about the territorial parameters. That was not going to be a success story ultimately. The more important objective was for Ukraine to survive as a sovereign, democratic country free to pursue integration with the West," end quote. The report said that Biden set 3 objectives for the war: ensure Ukraine would survive as a sovereign state, keep the U.S. and its allies united, and avoid a direct war with Russia. Though those all sound like very nice goals, but this Time report left out another goal that the Biden administration openly said, which was the goal to weaken Russia. And this is something that Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, well, I should say former Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, now that the Trump administration is officially in, there's an acting Secretary of Defense, I forget his name, but Pete Hegseth hasn't been confirmed by the Senate yet. But anyway, so Lloyd Austin, he acknowledged back in April 2022, after his first trip to Ukraine during the war, that yes, we're trying to weaken Russia. And there were reports that said apparently Biden was upset that he said so publicly. But you read a little further into those reports and you learn that, well, weakening Russia is the official U.S. policy, but they didn't want to go around saying it publicly. And, you know, they're talking about how they didn't actually expect Ukraine to recapture all this territory. Well, there was a peace deal on the table in the first months of the war that if Ukraine agreed to neutrality, essentially the broad strokes were Ukrainian neutrality, possibly some limits on its military in exchange for a Russian withdrawal. Now, Ukraine is not in really any better position than it was then. All these people have been killed, and Ukraine's going to end up signing some deal where they give up territory. And I mean, this just goes to show, again, this report from Time magazine tries to dress it up as, oh, it's a success, even though Ukraine didn't drive Russia out. But it's been clear from the beginning that they wanted this war to continue because they wanted to try to weaken Russia. And of course, there was lots of money to be made with all these weapons being poured into Ukraine. So, despite the reality on the ground in Ukraine, Biden administration officials are still claiming that it's a success. This is what Green told Time. He said, quote, "It's unfortunately the kind of success where you don't feel great about it, because there is so much suffering for Ukraine and so much uncertainty about where it's ultimately going to land," end quote. And the Time report noted that Zelensky, who defined victory as expelling Russian forces and taking Crimea from Russia, he recently complained about Biden despite, this massive amount of aid that he provided Ukraine. This was in his interview that he did recently with Lex Friedman. Zelensky said, quote, "With all due respect to the United States and the administration, I don't want the same situation like we had with Biden. I ask for sanctions now, please, and weapons now," end quote. So not very grateful for all the support, but I mean, it just goes to show they never expected any kind of victory from this. This was just about keeping Ukraine in the West's orbit and trying to hurt Russia. All right, so the next one here, Putin congratulates Trump, says Moscow is ready for talks. This article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. So Russian President Vladimir Putin congratulated Donald Trump as he was inaugurated and offered to engage with the new president on Ukraine. Washington is Kiev's primary backer and will have to be involved in the talks to end the Ukraine war. Putin said on Monday, quote, "We congratulate the U.S. president-elect on taking office. We are open to dialogue with the new U.S. administration on the Ukraine conflict," end quote. So Kyle gets into some of Russia's, main demands, and the reports that we're seeing is that Russia is going to ask for a guarantee that Ukraine will not join NATO. And time is on Russia's side here. I don't think they're going to go for any deal that really makes big compromises for what they want. And so we will see, this is something on the campaign trail. Trump said he could have this done in 24 hours, but obviously that's not going to happen. Now his officials are talking about trying to get it done within 100 days, expecting it to take months. So we'll see how long this war drags on for. Hopefully they can get a deal done quick, or just a ceasefire to start and then enter negotiations. All right, so the next one here, Trump designates Mexican cartels as terrorists. So this is from Trump's inauguration speech on Monday. President Donald Trump signaled in his inauguration speech on Monday that he was preparing for confrontations in the Western Hemisphere by vowing to label Mexican cartels as foreign terrorist organizations and vowing to take back the Panama Canal. Trump said in the speech that he would be deploying the military to the southern border with Mexico to repel what he called the disastrous invasion of our country, and that he would be signing an executive order to designate the cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. According to Fox News, the designations will apply to Mexican cartels and also some non-Mexican gangs, including MS-13. The action will designate the groups as foreign terrorist organizations and specially designated global terrorists. So these are two different designations. And essentially what these are sanctions that seize any assets the targets may have in the U.S. and bars them from entering the country. The designations also open up anyone for criminal prosecution who provides what they call material support to these groups. And this is the way the cartels work in Mexico. I mean, they're very intertwined with, they control a lot of territory. They have a lot of power. And when it comes to the gangs and stuff, I've seen people point out that some people are forced to live amongst these cartels and gangs and pay them, protection money. They're basically extorted by them. So with a sweeping designation like this, people like that could be sucked into some of the penalties. So, and terror designations, I mean, the thing to be concerned about here is that this could be a first step toward military action against Mexican cartels. And this is an idea favored by many Republicans and people close to Trump, despite the obvious risks. I mean, the idea here is to crack down on the flow of fentanyl into the U.S. But I mean, a war with the cartels, there's always going to be people smuggling drugs, and fentanyl is so small. I mean, they barely need to, it's just so easy to hide. I mean, it's just a war with the cartels would just create chaos. And again, it would not be easy. They have sophisticated weapons. There was reports of them that they had some anti-tank missiles from Ukraine. And I think this is something, if the U.S. decides to launch military action against the cartels, that's a way to bring a real war to American soil, because the cartels certainly have assets, people in the United States that could carry out attacks. And again, they have some sophisticated weapons. So it would just be, I think, a total disaster. But there is a lot of support for this among Republicans, something I need to start kind of paying more attention to now that we have Trump saying this stuff. Again, Trump's not saying, he didn't come out and say that he's going to, launch a war against the cartels. He said he's designating them and that he's deploying the military to the border. So Mike Waltz, who is now the national security advisor, when he was in Congress, in the House, he actually sponsored a bill that would have authorized the use of force against cartels and other groups. It was very broad authorization for any groups responsible for trafficking fentanyl or fentanyl-related substances into the United States, or carrying out other related activities that cause destabilization in the Western Hemisphere. So again, a very broad designation. But I think it is a real concern because that bill got like 25 co-sponsors in the House. This is, a decent amount of Republicans want something like this to happen. So now turning to the Panama Canal, in his inaugural address, Trump said that he wanted to retake it under the pretext that it's currently being controlled by China. And that's just, there's no evidence that the canal is being controlled by China. The thing people point to in 2 ports near the canal, there's a Chinese-based company, or I think they're Hong Kong-based companies manage the ports. And you'd be surprised, a lot of ports in the United States are managed by foreign companies. So it's not really that odd that that's the case, but this is the pretext. And he's also saying that Panama is violating the treaty that they signed, that under which the U.S. handed control of the canal to Panama. He said, quote, "The purpose of our deal and the spirit of our treaty has been totally violated. American ships are being severely overcharged and not treated fairly in any way, shape, or form, and that includes the United States Navy. And above all, China is operating the Panama Canal, and we didn't give it to China, we gave it to Panama, and we're taking it back," end quote. Trump also said some good-sounding things in his inaugural address, said that he aims to be a peacemaker, and pointed to his involvement in clinching the Gaza ceasefire deal. He said, quote, "My proudest legacy will be that of a peacemaker and unifier. That's what I want to be, a peacemaker and a unifier. I'm pleased to say that as of yesterday, 1 day before I assumed office, the hostages in the Middle East are coming back home to their families," end quote. So, mixed messages that we're getting here. I think that there's a lot of signs. He didn't say anything about Greenland or Canada, but there's signs here that they might be gearing up for some stuff in Latin America. And Marco Rubio being the Secretary of State is another sign of that, because he's very hawkish on, Venezuela, Cuba, and I think the cartels as well. All right, so the next one here, Israel expects Trump to restart supplying 2,000-pound bombs. So Israel's outgoing ambassador to the U.S. expects President Trump to supply Israel with a shipment of 2,000-pound bombs that President Biden had paused. Biden put a hold on this 2,000-pound shipment and a 500-pound bomb shipment back in April as part of what was just a public relations stunt. I mean, if that's not, it's clear, more clear now than ever. This was all just PR. He put a hold on 2 shipments of bombs, and the idea was to pressure Israel over its invasion of Rafah that it was planning. And then they went ahead and did it anyway, and Biden gave Netanyahu the green light anyway. They spoke on the phone before it started. They captured the border crossing. They destroyed the city. I mean, the pictures coming out of Rafah from people returning is just completely destroyed. So that's all it was. And what happened, so it was a 500-pound bomb shipment and a 2,000-pound bomb shipment. They ended up sending the 500-pound bombs in July. They still held the 2,000-pound bombs. But before this pause, they sent 14,000 2,000-pound bombs to Israel after October 7th. And they used these to destroy residential buildings in very densely populated areas. But anyway, the point I'm making is that this was just PR by Biden. But Netanyahu took it and used it to claim that there were that the U.S. was imposing these restrictions on military aid to Israel. He was complaining about weapon shipments being delayed a lot. Republicans picked up on that, even though Biden provided Israel with more military aid in a single year than any other president in history. But anyway, so this is Michael Herzog. He's the Israeli ambassador to Israel. The Israeli ambassador to the U.S. He told Axios, quote, "We believe that Trump is going to release at the beginning of his term the munitions that haven't been released until now by the Biden administration," end quote. The release of the bombs is part of a series of agreements the Trump administration reached with Israel to get Netanyahu to agree to the hostage ceasefire deal. Herzog said, quote, "The Trump team played a major role. They were resolved to get a deal, but were very cognizant of our security concerns. They got some things from the Israeli side that allowed the deal to go through, and they gave us some things and will give more going forward, end quote. So Netanyahu said that he received assurances from Trump that he could resume military operations in Gaza if he chooses to do so. And this has been confirmed by Mike Waltz. And there's been signs that the Trump administration might push for the deal to stick. On Monday night, I just saw, while he was signing executive orders, Trump went to the arena, where the Capitals play in D.C., the Capital One Arena, to sign. He did a speech. It was like an event, and then he signed some executive orders there. And then he went back to the Oval Office, and he was signing more. So while he's signing that, someone asked, are you confident that the Gaza ceasefire is going to hold? And he said, I'm not confident. It's not our war, so I don't know. I'm not confident that it's going to hold. So that's not very promising. But again, there's signs that Witkoff is going to work on it. He's going to be involved. And he's already proved himself a better diplomat than anyone that was in the Biden administration working on this thing. All right, so the next one here, Palestinians searching Gaza rubble for bodies. So Monday marked the second day of the ceasefire in Gaza. It looked like a few Palestinians were killed, at least 3. And Palestinians began the work of digging through the rubble in search of the 10,000 bodies that are estimated to be buried under the buildings that were destroyed by Israel's bombing campaign. A spokesman for Gaza's civil defense said that they're searching for 10,000 bodies and said that they believe at least 2,840 bodies were melted and that there's no traces of them, just completely gone. Medical sources told Al Jazeera that 135 bodies were found in the destroyed southern city of Rafah. Gaza's health ministry said in its daily update that hospitals received 122 bodies in the previous 24 hours, including 62 who were dug out of the rubble. This is a drone shot from Jabalia, northern Gaza, and you see it is just in complete ruins, just completely destroyed, completely leveled. The pictures now coming out, it's just shows the destruction. The health ministry said that its death toll since October 2023 has reached 47,035, and the number of wounded has climbed to 111,091. So the ministry has only counted the dead and wounded brought to hospitals and morgues, meaning that each body that they dig out is going to be added to this death toll. So we're still going to see this death toll climb by the dozens, possibly by the hundreds, every single day now for a while. And then we'll get a clearer picture of the real number. And as we know, the Lancet study that came out recently said the health ministry's number is likely an undercount by 41%. They think the real death toll just from violence alone is over 70,000, and that doesn't include the indirect deaths. So according to the Palestinian news agency Wafa, 2 Palestinian civilians, including a boy, were killed by IDF snipers in Rafah despite the ceasefire. And then later in the day, another child was killed by an Israeli sniper in Rafah. 10 Palestinians were also wounded as a result of Israeli gunfire. So some Palestinians killed by the IDF, but no bombing or anything like that. So under the ceasefire deal, aid deliveries have surged into Gaza. The UN said that 630 trucks entered Gaza on Sunday and 915 entered on Monday. So Palestinians in Gaza, they've been celebrating. They've been enjoying this increase in supplies, getting food for their families, but they're also returning to their homes and finding these just completely, you see these pictures. Just completely destroyed. So now the big question is, when is the reconstruction going to happen? And of course, it's still up in the air if the ceasefire is permanent or not. So, and then I believe the next hostage release is maybe January 26th or the 25th. Hamas is going to release more hostages, and then more Palestinians will be freed from Israeli jails. All right, so the next one here, Jakarta is unaware of a plan to relocate Gaza Palestinians to Indonesia. So on Monday, the Indonesian government said that it was unaware of any plan to temporarily relocate Palestinians living in Gaza to Indonesia, after NBC News reported the Trump administration was considering the idea. The NBC report cited a Trump official who said there were discussions about relocating Palestinians during the reconstruction of Gaza, and said Indonesia was among the locations under discussion of where some of them could go. Indonesia's foreign ministry said it was the first time that they've heard about it. They said, "You're telling me this for the first time." And so this is an issue because, again, you see the destruction. So long term, it's a reconstruction project that's going to take years and years, potentially decades. I mean, just getting all the rubble out of there is going to take a long time. And Palestinians in Gaza would likely be hesitant to leave because they would fear that Israel won't let them back in. And that's a very reasonable fear to have, considering the history and what the Israeli government's been saying. Many members of the government, of the Israeli Knesset, have openly called for the ethnic cleansing of Gaza, and they want Jewish settlements. They want beach condos. So there's a lot of reason not to go for a plan like this. But again, at the same time, the infrastructure is just completely destroyed in Gaza. How are people really going to live there? All right, so the next one here, Israeli military prepares escalation in the West Bank. So Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi, Chief of Staff of the IDF, said Monday that the Israeli military must prepare for a significant escalation in the West Bank and the continuation of operations in Gaza and Lebanon. Halevi said, quote, "Alongside the enhanced defensive preparations in the Gaza Strip, we must be ready for significant operations in the West Bank in the coming days. This is to preempt and capture terrorists before they reach our citizens," end quote. This, that was according to an IDF spokesman who said that Halevi also, quote, "ordered the formulation of plans for the continuation of fighting in the Gaza Strip and Lebanon," end quote. So the IDF is saying they're preparing to restart the fighting, restart the campaign in Lebanon and Gaza. So again, another bad sign here. But I think, the big announcement here is that they're escalating in the West Bank. That they're preparing for Gaza and Lebanon. Again, not a good sign, but I think the West Bank is something to keep an eye on, because I think it might be likely that this was something that the Trump people told Netanyahu was, look, you signed this deal. We're going to back your land grabs, your annexations in the West Bank, whatever you want to do there. Let's just calm things down in Gaza for a bit, and then you could turn your attention on the West Bank. And in Lebanon, so they also mentioned Lebanon. So January 26th is the end of the 60-day ceasefire. And by January 26th, Israeli troops are supposed to be gone. They're supposed to have withdrawn from southern Lebanon. But they still occupy about 60 towns and villages in southern Lebanon. I say it's a ceasefire. Israel has not ceased firing. They've been violating it the whole time. Hezbollah only, as far as I know, responded once by firing 2 rockets into an open area. But Hezbollah is saying if Israeli troops are there past the deadline, then they're going to respond. They're going to retaliate. So if they don't withdraw, we might see another big escalation in Lebanon. I'm not sure how the Trump administration feels about the situation in Lebanon. All right, so the next one here, Palestinian child killed in Israeli raid, soldiers killed in the West Bank. This article is from the Palestine Chronicle. A Palestinian child was shot by Israeli occupation forces during a raid on a town in the occupied West Bank on Sunday, while one Israeli soldier was killed and at least 2 others injured after an explosive device hit their vehicle in Tamun. Ahmad Rashid Jazar, 15, was shot in the chest with live bullets during the raid on Sebastia, northwest of Nablus, according to the Palestinian Red Crescent Society. The official Palestinian news agency Wafa reported he was rushed to a nearby hospital where he was announced dead by the Ministry of Health. The town's mayor, Mohammed Azem, said the Israeli army fired live bullets, sound bombs, and toxic tear gas toward local residents and their homes during the raid, causing several cases of suffocation among residents. In the town of Idna, 2 Palestinians were injured during a raid, including a 17-year-old with a gunshot wound to the hand and an 11-year-old child. Witnesses said that the Israeli army raided the town for about 2 hours before withdrawing. Clashes erupted during the raid with the use of live ammunition, rubber bullets, and tear gas. So at least 859 Palestinians have been killed and over 6,700 injured by Israeli army fire in the West Bank since October 2023. And that is, there was an escalation in the West Bank. I know those numbers don't sound high compared to Gaza, but for the history of the conflict for the West Bank, that's a lot of violence that's been happening in the West Bank. All right, so the next one here, interview with someone in Syria who says the people in Syria are scared. So this is from Rick Sterling. He interviewed a person who did not use their real name, who was described as a high-level translator and university professor who lives in Damascus. And essentially what this person is saying is that the situation is not stable. People are scared. There's been fighting. Just recently, he talks about that there was some fighting happening. HTS military leadership sent groups to confront people who they claimed were members of the Assad regime, and that there was artillery shelling, and that there's kind of been this fighting going on that we're not really hearing about at all in the news. And he gets into how HTS has basically just brought its government from Idlib into Damascus, and that's who's been appointed in all these high-level positions. They're changing the curriculum of the schools to reflect their kind of strain of Islam. And, these are former Al-Qaeda guys. Former could be in quotes there. You saw the example of the justice minister. A video surfaced of him overseeing the execution of 2 women for adultery in Idlib, back in 2015, which is not that long ago. If I was overseeing things like that 10 years ago, I don't think anybody would want to hire me to be a justice minister. But this just an interesting interview. I would recommend people go read it for themselves to see how just someone living in Syria feels. He's saying his friends who are, the minorities, the Christians, the Alawites, and some Sunni Muslims are thinking about leaving now. They're still barely getting any electricity, which was the situation before the HTS takeover. They say that he did say there's more food because Turkey's, they're importing stuff from Turkey, but people have no money and there's not really much opportunity, and it's just it's kind of this brewing sectarian violence that's happening. Again, we're just really not hearing about in the Western media reports. All right, so the last story here, 37 killed in Turkish-backed push against Syria's Tishreen dam. So this one's from Jason Ditz. So the fighting in North Syria continued on Monday with another offensive by the Turkish-backed Syrian National Army on the Tishreen dam and the surrounding area. The Kurdish SDF, which controls the area, repelled the offensive. Despite losing the gateway town of Manbij in early Turkish-backed offensives, the SDF has successfully defended this area, the Tishreen dam. Already, over 440 fighters have been killed on both sides in just the month and a half since the fall of the al-Assad Syrian government. The SNA suffered heavy losses in Monday's push, with the SDF reporting that 29 SNA were killed. And then earlier in the day, 8 SDF fighters were killed, so a total of 37 killed in the fighting on Monday. So since assuming power in Syria last month, the Islamist Hayat Tahrir al-Sham de facto government in Syria has supported the anti-Kurd offensives. Now it is reported that an HTS military convoy arrived on the front lines at the dam on Monday and is preparing to join the battle. In response, Kurdish civilians have been holding sit-in protests at the Tishreen Dam, calling for the international community to stop the attacks and warning that the fall of the dam would be a humanitarian crisis. Turkey has attacked these sit-ins. They killed a Kurdish politician recently. And so I think it looks like the HTS wants to disarm the SDF. And, it'll be interesting to see how the U.S. responds to this, because they're being all friendly. Actually, well, we got the Trump administration now, so we'll see how they handle this whole situation in Syria. The way to handle it is to withdraw and not to support this new government. At the same time, I still think, all sanctions should be lifted for the sake of the people living there, because that's what sanctions always just hurt ordinary people. But what I mean is the U.S. shouldn't be providing any aid to the HTS government, shouldn't be helping them in any military offensives or anything, and just withdraw, get this thousands of U.S. troops out of there. Anyway, that is it for the news for today. Actually, I have another story in the blog. about Defend the Guard. Defend the Guard introduced in Oregon. This is a press release from Oregon's Coalition for Peace. So if you're in Oregon, it's a good anti-war group, coalition of people of all sorts of political persuasions, and something they've been working on is Defend the Guard. So a bill that would radically change Oregon's involvement in foreign conflicts has been sponsored by Oregon Senate Minority Leader Daniel Bonham and freshman Senator Dianne Linthicum. SB 667, also known as Defend the Guard, is model legislation being proposed simultaneously in several other state governments that would prohibit National Guard troops from being deployed to foreign conflicts unless there is an official declaration of war by the United States Congress. Recently, the Oregon National Guard has been deployed to active conflict zones such as eastern Syria and the Sinai Peninsula. I remember recently they deployed Oregon National Guard to Syria. Oregon National Guard troops are a critical resource for confronting natural disasters in our state, such as floods and wildfires. During the devastating 2020 wildfire season, a lack of National Guard operated Chinook helicopters in our state was a contributing factor to the challenges of that season, as many of them were still deployed in the now defunct mission in Afghanistan. As of this writing, this bill has not yet been referred to a committee by Oregon Senate Leader Rob Wagner. The Peace Coalition will be working hard to make this piece of legislation a law. So again, if you're in Oregon, you want to get involved, or if you want to help with Defend the Guard, if this does get to the point where they're going to need phone banking for it, go to defendtheguard.us. I always put the link to the volunteer for phone banking in the description. I think this is one of the best ways you can do anti-war activism if states really start passing these. If this becomes law in some states, it's going to make a big difference. They send the National Guard to all these places, Syria, Iraq, Somalia, and taking that power away from the federal government would be huge. And they also, the guys at Defend the Guard, sent me a nice whiskey glass as a Christmas present, which was very nice of them. So, it's good activism to get involved in. So that is it for the news for today. Go check out our Viewpoints. One from Ron Paul, can Trump fix our broken foreign policy? One from Ted Snyder, Trump won, Biden nothing. One from Trita Parsi, Biden worked tirelessly around the clock to prevent a ceasefire. One from Michelle J. Kinnikin, Federalism, New Hampshire, and the USS Liberty. An interesting story about how some state legislation in New Hampshire might get some more information about the USS Liberty attack. And our spotlight is from Gideon Levy, No Innocents in Gaza, reflecting on Israel's first Kahain war. So please go check all of that out. You could always support this show by sharing it, like, subscribe, comment, and all that stuff. Follow us on social media, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. TikTok is back now. I know that CEO was at the Trump inauguration. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.